Nations, and I continue to represent Indigenous youth from North America within the international arena. As Indigenous peoples, we have a responsibility to respect, maintain, and strengthen our relationship with our traditional lands and territories. Today, Indigenous homelands across the country are threatened by destructive fossil fuel resource extraction methods such as fracking, tar sands pipelines, and mining. These industrial practices have already left a legacy of contamination, and it will continue to shape long-term impacts not only to our vital natural resources, but to our cultural and traditional well-being. Another important issue Indigenous peoples face is us having the highest rate of youth suicide within the nation. Young people are taking their own lives because they have no hope. They are often faced with extreme poverty, systemic racism, and intergenerational trauma. There remains insufficient awareness of these injustices, and lack of cultural identity are central to the suffering of our Indigenous youth. We can change this reality by creating Indigenous-based education programs and employment opportunities for our youth. Government and tribal nations need to develop continuing dynamic dialogue and comprehensive strategies for improving quality of life within our communities. This vision may be accomplished through the planning and support of community-based, Indigenous-led initiatives to revitalize our infrastructure, restore Indigenous languages, strengthen cultural identity, and reaffirm our right to self-determination. Ultimately, the decisions we make today are going to affect the future generations to come. Senator Sanders, I know you have spoken about large investments to benefit rural and low-income communities. What are your plans for investing in and supporting Indigenous peoples, and are you prepared to take significant transformative action?
Thank you very much for your description of some of the tragic circumstances right now which are facing the Indigenous people. So let me just very briefly touch on some of your issues. Number one, I think if you check my record, you will find that I have stood up and will continue to stand up to mining extraction companies that are trying to invade Indigenous territory. Number two, I do that because I know, as every person in this room knows, and we don't have to go through the whole sordid history of what has happened to the Native American people in this country from the day of the first settlers coming here. We all know what it is. It is a tragedy beyond belief, right? And I know, and I sometimes feel hesitant to say these things because the Native American people have been hearing speeches for a very, very long time, yes, that have not turned into action. But I believe that we have a moral responsibility to make certain that we treat the Native American communities with the respect that has long, long, long been denied them. There is no excuse. I mean, it is not only copper companies coming in trying to take over Native American land and poison that land. But there is no excuse that we have rates of unemployment, of suicide, of alcoholism, which is unparalleled in America. So I think if you check my record, you will find that I have always stood with the oppressed people of this country, and there are no people who have been more oppressed than the indigenous people of this country. So yes, I will stand with you and do everything that I can to bring dignity and respect and economic opportunity to those people who do not have it today.
Yeah, Bernie!
Senator Sanders, if I could follow up with you on this question, and I know you've been getting this and been hearing this from lots of different places, just a conversation about the rigged rules of the economy, particularly in communities of color, particularly in indigenous communities. And the feeling from many of these communities that I've been hearing is that their stories aren't heard in the larger story of inequality. So can you quickly respond in terms of how you and other politicians, not just you, should be responding to the particular harms and the stories around the history and the rigged rules that have affected communities of color and indigenous communities.
Thank you. When we talk about a rigged economy where the rich get richer and almost everybody else gets poorer, it's important to understand that while many, many people have gotten poorer, it has been the African American community, the indigenous community, the Latino community that have suffered the most. No question about that. And there is no question, and not debatable, that institutional racism exists in America today, and that has got to be frontally attacked. I will give you just one example, as you well know. This is unbelievable, but it's true. I was in a community called Sandytown, I think it was, in Baltimore. This is what goes on in a great American city today, Baltimore, Maryland. Walked into the community, and this is where Freddie Gray was killed, by the way. Walked into the community, there are no grocery stores. None. Mother cannot buy fresh food for her kids. There is not a bank in the community. You know what exists? Payday lenders who charge unbelievable. That's right. All right. And that's an issue we're going to deal with as well. People should not be making money out of desperately poor people. We know. We know. We have seen it too often on television. Unarmed people, often African American or other minorities, being shot by police officers. We must hold police officers and every other public official accountable when they break the law. We have seen in Ferguson and elsewhere an incredible militarization of local police departments. Police departments are not supposed to be occupying forces. They're supposed to be part of the community. We've got to make police departments look like the communities they serve in terms of their diversity. So in terms of dealing with institutional racism, in terms of dealing with a broken criminal justice system, this will be a major, major priority for a Sanders administration.
Thank you, Senator. So I'd like to next introduce Norman Harry, who's the former tribal chair of the Pyramid Lake Paiute.
Senator, it's an honor to be here, and we're really glad that you're here, and I'm really glad to see a lot of our relatives from across the state of Nevada and across the country to be here as well. The issues that we're facing here in the West are going to be a little bit different than what you've been used to hearing in the East. And the major focus that we have to deal with here is dealing with water. I'd like to first start off by saying I'd like to welcome you to the Aboriginal lands of our indigenous people. That's the Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe tribes. As past chairman and working in the Indian country for the past 30 years, we've had to deal with some of the most important and deal with land issues, water rights issues, water rights negotiations, and also trying to protect the cultural resources of the tribe. Because of our reservations, actually our people have traversed across the Great Basin, and we're people that hunted, gathered, fished, but we have the freedom of going throughout the Great Basin to survive. Now our Aboriginal lands have actually been condensed because of the reservations, but the impacts and cultural resources are still out there. We've had our tribe at Pyramid Lake has had success in achieving a water negotiating settlement, and I'm proud to say that as of November of last year, we achieved the final passage for 101-618, also the Truckee River Operating Agreement, but it took almost 30 years, which demonstrates the perseverance with all that were involved. We have the industries here in Nevada that have had a huge impact on the water resources, particularly knowing that every basin within the state of Nevada is over-appropriated, both surface water and groundwater. We have the industries that have impacted the groundwater, particularly mining, and again, being on federal lands. So we know there has to be reform in areas, and looking at how this is attributable to resource protection. And so in looking at one of the antiquated laws, of course, be looking at the 1872 mining law. So my question to you, Senator, is what is your plan for water management in the West, and not only Nevada, but the entire West?
Chairman, thanks for all of your work, and thanks for touching on an issue of huge, huge consequence, which I think we are only just beginning to recognize, and that is the issue of water. For a start, let me back it up and tell you this. I'm a member of the Environmental Committee. I'm a member of the Senate Energy Committee. I believe, having talked to scientists all over this world, that climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. It is already causing devastating problems. So to answer one part of your question, I believe we need to take on the fossil fuel industry. I believe we need to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And in that regard, I have introduced legislation which would end the extraction of fossil fuel from publicly owned lands. Okay? And what we have also done is introduced in the Senate the most comprehensive climate change legislation ever introduced. So the first thing and the broadest answer to your question is we have a real crisis in terms of climate change, in terms of drought, California, Nevada, other parts of the world, in terms of flooding, extreme weather disturbances. I believe that the United States must lead the world and work with countries around the world in transforming our energy system. In terms of water management, what we have to do is recognize that we have a resource that must be fairly utilized by all people and not just powerful special interests. Whether they are agricultural interests or mining interests. Small farmers need help too. Individual citizens need help. And I think that when you look at Flint, Michigan today, by the way, and that horrendous public health tragedy, you're looking at the canary in the cage. I think you're going to see more and more of that, which is why, among other things, I have proposed $1 trillion investment to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, including levees and dams, to make sure that we do as good a job as possible in preserving our limited water resources. Yeah.